Ashley has always been very sensitive to people interfering in her personal life, especially when it was her father. Donald Robertson was a successful businessman who was used to being in control of everything he had anything to do with. However, it was one thing for him to try to control his staff, but trying to control all the aspects of his daughter's life was something very different. Ashley had always been a strong-willed child. Her mother died when the girl was only 7 years old, and therefore most of the woman's childhood memories involved only her father. Donald Robinson's upbringing was rather peculiar and was based primarily on providing comfort and luxury for his only daughter. The nannies and the tutors did their jobs perfectly, and the fact that Ashley went on to graduate from one of the best universities in the country was a clear confirmation of that. Time passed. Ashley got her degree in economics. It would seem that Donald Robinson would calm down and be sure that his daughter would have a great life. But in fact, the hard part was only about to start. Realizing that he wasn't getting any younger, the businessman started thinking about marrying his daughter off to someone he could eventually entrust his business with. The woman's purpose is to take care of the home and the kiddos. It's the man's job to take care of the business, Mr. Robinson said, ignoring the fact that his daughter had an economics degree. Ashley knew her father's tough temper all too well, and thus tried her best to avoid arguing with him. But when Donald Robinson told his daughter that he'd found a suitable partner for her, the woman's surprise knew no bounds. "But, Dad, it's my life. Do you hear me? I can't just do what you want all the time. You might have forgotten, but I'm an adult already, and I definitely have the right to decide whom to marry," Ashley said indignantly. The woman couldn't have known how deeply her answer would hurt her father. "I didn't bring this question up for no reason. Brandon Young would make a great partner for you. His parents are wealthy people with assets worth 7 figures, and they have connections even in Congress," Mr. Robinson objected without hiding his irritation. To say that Ashley was shocked would be a huge understatement. The woman had known Brandon for a long time and couldn't say anything bad about him, or anything good for that matter. Having wealthy parents, the young man never learned the value of hard work or money. He spent his parents' fortune left and right, living his rich life without a care in the world. Nevertheless, Ashley felt like she didn't have the right to judge Brandon, since she was also a rich heiress who never felt in need of anything in her life. It was precisely their similar background that Donald Robinson decided to use to put pressure on his daughter and persuade her to enter into this beneficial union. Unfortunately, the man didn't seem to care about Ashley's feelings or personal preferences. In order to speed up the process of merging the two financial empires, Mr. Robinson had a conversation with Brandon's parents and got their support. Now, the only thing left was to bring the young people together and publicly announce their engagement. That way, they won't have a way out. It's for the good of them both, Donald Robinson thought. At that point, the man truly believed that he was doing a good thing, taking care of his daughter's future, and that she would certainly thank him later. In order for everything to go smoothly, the businessman booked a table at a restaurant and invited Brandon and his parents to dinner, as well as some other guests. Confident in the successful outcome of his undertaking, Mr. Robinson didn't think that anything could go wrong. The businessman truly believed that if he got Ashley cornered, he could make her change her mind. To make sure that his daughter didn't suspect anything, the businessman also invited many friends and colleagues to that dinner. Donald always thought of himself as good at scheming, and therefore he had high hopes for the coming evening. Of course, Ashley had no idea what was about to happen, and thought of this dinner as just another evening out with her father's colleagues. The woman had previously been invited to similar events, all of which were aimed at strengthening her father's relationships with his business partners. But when Ashley saw Brandon sitting at the table, a shadow of doubt crept into her heart. Donald Robinson was a great dinner host. He was cheerful and made many jokes. The guests were laughing and praising the businessman for the wonderful time they were having. In the middle of the diner, Mr. Robinson got up from the table and asked for a moment of attention. Having exchanged a meaningful look with Brandon's father, the businessman began his speech. First, the man thanked Alfred and Penelope Young for raising such a good son. Then Donald moved on to Brandon, whom he praised for his devotion to his father's ideals and business. But when the businessman began to describe how exceptional Ashley was, the woman realized that her father was about to announce her engagement to Brandon. No, I'm not ready. Not like this, flashed through the head of the young, rich woman. Ashley saw her father's decision as simply unacceptable. The woman always considered herself as an independent person and believed that she had the right to arrange her own personal life herself. But now it turned out that her father had decided everything for her. Without waiting for her father to finish his speech, Ashley got up from the table and hurried for the exit under the surprised looks of the other guests. Donald Robinson stopped mid-sentence and looked after his daughter, outraged. He understood everything without words, and Ashley's disobedience infuriated him. The rest of the evening was uneventful and bleak. On a subconscious level, the guests understood that the businessman had invited them all for a reason and was planning on sharing some important news. Feeling hurt, Mr. Robinson paid for dinner and was among the first ones to leave the restaurant. The businessman wanted to get home as soon as possible in order to have a long, in-depth conversation with Ashley. However, to Donald's great surprise, his daughter didn't greet him at the door but locked herself in her room instead. Ashley, open the door. Can you hear me? What you did today was simply unacceptable, the businessman exclaimed. Unacceptable? Really? Was it really? And forcing your daughter into marriage is acceptable? Or do I not get a vote on the matter? Ashley answered through the door. The fight between the businessman and his daughter lasted about 10 minutes, after which they both calmed down a bit. Of course, Donald Robinson was too stubborn to give in to his daughter. Ashley also wasn't going to follow her father's lead and intended to continue to stand up to him. The next morning, she got up earlier than usual and quickly left the house, deliberately avoiding any contact with her father. Since Ashley didn't have time to have breakfast, she decided to stop by a cozy cafe where they made excellent coffee. Despite the early hour, there were a lot of people there. Those were mostly students who came to get a quick breakfast before their classes started, and truckers who liked the value for the money in this cafe. To Ashley's surprise, she took the last free table located in the far corner of the cafe. But as soon as the woman placed her order with the waitress, a young man limped over to her table. "Good morning, miss. Is this seat taken?" the stranger asked politely. Ashley gave the man an appraising look, then allowed him to sit down. The stranger looked like a simple, hard-working man, probably a mechanic or a gas station attendant. The man's shabby jacket, old jeans, and battered sneakers made Ashley feel somewhat sorry for him. Well, not everyone can afford to overdress like Brandon, the young woman thought to herself. Meanwhile, the man sitting opposite her introduced himself as Ethan and said he worked as a tractor driver on one of the local farms. Ashley introduced herself too and didn't even realize as they started chatting. "Wow, I would have never thought that this is what a real tractor driver looks like," the woman said with a smile. "Come on, what's that? I've been around farm equipment since childhood. My dad worked on a tractor, and so did my grandfather, so it runs in the family," Ethan added modestly. As they continued to talk, Ashley learned that the limp Ethan had wasn't something he was born with, but rather developed after a terrible accident he got into with his father. "My dad died in the accident, but I survived, so now I live on the farm with my mother," Ethan added sadly. At that moment, Ashley felt sorry for this sweet young man who lost his father and good health all at the same time. The young people chatted for about 2 hours, after which they parted, having made arrangements to meet again the next morning. Ashley couldn't understand why she felt so comfortable around this calm and confident man. Ethan didn't have a lot of money or an expensive car, but it didn't seem to bother him. The man simply accepted his life as it was and never focused on his problems. Carried away by her conversation with Ethan, Ashley didn't even notice how their first meeting was followed by a second one, and then a third. The young people had fun together, enjoying each other's company and life. Of course, Donald Robinson couldn't help but notice the change in his daughter's behavior. And Ashley did change. She'd become more affectionate and cheerful. Trying to find out the reason for this change, the businessman quickly learned about the relationship between his daughter and the tractor driver. That same day, Ashley had a long, unpleasant conversation with her father. Going over the bleak future his daughter would have, Donald Robinson insisted that she immediately stop seeing that poor tractor driver. "Dad, can I make my own decisions, at least once? Why can't I date Ethan?" Ashley exclaimed with tears in her eyes. "Because this relationship can't lead to anything good. What can this farmer give you? A mountain of debt and a bunch of hungry kiddos?" The businessman didn't give up. Ashley has exhausted all her arguments, trying to change her father's mind. Eventually, tired of the endless fighting, she called Ethan and asked him to meet up with her. Ashley didn't beat around the bush and immediately shared her problem with the man. Ethan thought for a moment, after which his face brightened and his eyes seemed to lighten up. "Well, if your father doesn't want to see me in his house, you should move in with me. My mom will be very happy about it, I'm sure," the man said, taking Ashley by the hand. Ethan understood that the woman needed his help and support more than ever. Ashley hesitated for a moment. The fight with her father was exhausting, which was the main reason why she decided to change the scenery, at least for a little while. At that moment, Ashley made the decision to spite her father, but she couldn't have even suspected what it would lead to. Of course, his daughter's decision infuriated Donald Robinson. "I'll block all your accounts, do you hear me? I'll cancel all your credit cards. You won't get any money from me," the angry businessman shouted after her. But Ashley didn't care anymore. Having left for Ethan's farm, the woman found herself in the realm of peace and comfort, which she had been dreaming of for several years. Priscilla Miller was happy with her son's girlfriend and surrounded her with care and attention from the moment they met. Of course, life on the farm could hardly be called easy, but Ashley didn't complain and quickly got used to the new conditions. She milked the cows with Mrs. Miller in the mornings and then helped out in the fields and fed the poultry in the afternoon. Days flew by, each of them exactly like the previous one. During this time, Ashley grew very attached to Ethan, and therefore their decision to get married wasn't all that surprising. Having held a modest wedding ceremony, the young people started living their simple but happy family life. To provide his wife and mother with everything they needed, Ethan worked out in the field from dusk till dawn and never stopped thanking God for what they had. Meanwhile, Donald Robinson couldn't handle being in the dark, so he hired a private detective in order to make inquiries about his daughter. Since the businessman didn't know that Ashley had gotten married, he still hoped to get his daughter back and marry her off to Brandon. But when the private investigator got back to Mr. Robinson a week later with his report, the rich man was furious. How dare she? How could she marry some poor tractor driver? A limp one, too. What did you say his name was? Ethan Miller, sir, the detective answered helpfully. The businessman's face suddenly turned pale, and deep wrinkles appeared on his forehead. Miller? Isn't that the one? No, that's impossible. But the lameness, could it all be just a coincidence? Without saying another word to the detective, Donald Robertson paid for his services and let him go. Then he decided to pay his daughter a visit and find out everything on the spot. Needless to say, Ashley was very surprised to see her father's luxurious Bentley at the farm gate. The businessman got out of the car and looked into his daughter's eyes. "Come in, Dad, or would you prefer to stay outside?" Ashley sighed sadly. The woman's face made it obvious that she had been expecting this visit for a long time. To Ashley's great surprise, her father didn't start a fight. Instead, he politely greeted Priscilla Miller before approaching Ethan. Having endured the heavy gaze of the businessman, the young tractor driver extended his hand to Donald. The businessman smiled and shook his son-in-law's hand. A little later, when they were already drinking tea at the kitchen table, the businessman finally decided to ask the main question. Looking down in embarrassment, Mr. Robertson asked Ethan how exactly he injured his leg. Ethan looked at the guest in surprise, after which he pulled himself together and said, "There was a car accident, sir. My father and I went fishing on that fateful morning. There was fog, which made it a little difficult to see the road. That was probably why my father didn't immediately notice the car that drove into the oncoming lane. He couldn't avoid the collision. My dad died before the paramedics arrived, and I got this injury." Donald Robertson turned even paler. Unable to contain his emotions, the man sobbed softly and knelt down in front of Ethan. "Forgive me, son. That day I was in the passenger seat of the car that crashed into you. You have to believe me, there was nothing I could do. It all happened so quickly. The driver responsible for the crash had died of cancer a long time ago, and I've been feeling guilty for being unable to prevent the accident all this time." Her father's confession shocked Ashley. The young woman had never seen her father so flustered and uncomfortable. To Ethan's credit, he didn't blame Mr. Robertson for the accident. The young tractor driver understood that it wasn't the businessman's fault that he ended up in that car at the time of the accident. Hugging his father-in-law, Ethan patted him on the shoulder and said that he wasn't mad at him. A new life was awaiting the family, and there would be no secrets, manipulation, or overbearing control in it. As it turned out a little later, Ashley was 2 months pregnant at the time of their reunion, and this news was the best gift for the businessman. Now that all the grievances and hardships were left behind, Donald Robertson swore before Priscilla Miller that he would do everything in his power to make sure the young couple, as well as their kiddos, were always happy.